Welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly. We've got an interesting show planned for today. In our first segment, we're talking to Chaz Ballew, who is the co-founder and CEO of our sponsor, Aptable. We're going to talk about the Aptable Comply product and how it helps organizations with automation of some of the most painful aspects of audit and assessment preparation. We're going to shift gears then in our second segment and discuss the anticipated Supreme Court ruling on the interpretation and scope of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or CFAA. We are very, very fortunate to have Priya Chaudhry back with us today, and she's going to help us present sort of a mock trial, if you will, between her and our co-host, John Snyder. So we're looking forward to seeing how that transpires. Josh is going to play the role of the defendant, the Georgia police officer who allegedly did something very naughty. And Scott and I are going to pretend to be Supreme Court justices. What the heck? So join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. The average cost to respond to an insider threat is $11.45 million. That's a lot of reasons why a functional insider threat program must be a core part of any modern cybersecurity strategy. To protect your organization's sensitive data and meet compliance requirements, you need controls in place to deter, detect, and disrupt insider threats. With ECRAN system, you can meet control requirements imposed by compliance mandates all within one insider threat management platform. Get your free 30-day trial at securityweekly.com/ECRAN. That's EKRAN, and fulfill your compliance requirements. Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, CYRISMA. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to episode 44 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on September 22nd, 2020, which, according to my calendar, is the first day of fall, which is hacker hoodie weather. So there's a chill in the air, and I'm happy to be wearing my hoodie again. I am, of course, your host, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my illustrious co-hosts, Mr. Josh Marpet, Mr. Scott Lyons, and the venerable John Snyder, Esquire. Gentlemen, welcome.
Today's going to be a lot of fun, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to it, and in our role of justices later, I'm looking forward to saying, "Lighten up, Scotty, baby."
Yeah, right.
Before we jump into it, do have a couple announcements. This is the week. This Saturday, September 26th, B-Sides Boston is back in action, and it's their 10-year anniversary. The conference is going to be virtual, of course, and tickets are only $10. You can get yours by going to https://bsidesbos.org. And some of the Security Weekly team, and I might show up. I'm going to hope hopefully remember to show up. We're going to be on our own channel on the B-Sides Boston Discord server, hanging out, answering questions, talking about all sorts of goofy things, maybe do some contests. So please join us and enjoy B-Sides Boston. Also, if you have any specific guest or topic requests that you want us to cover on this show or really any of our shows, you can submit your suggestions by going to https://securityweekly.com/guests and filling out the form. We review the suggestions as we receive them, or at least monthly, and we'll get back in touch with you once we've reviewed your submission. All right, enough of that. I'm pleased to introduce today Chaz Ballew. He's a co-founder and CEO of Aptable. Aptable is our sponsor for today, and he's going to talk to us about the Aptable Comply solution. And it was, it's one of those interesting events where, until Aptable became a sponsor, to be honest, full disclosure, I'd never actually heard of Aptable. And then a few weeks roll by, and I actually have a client right now that's using Aptable, although it's one of their other products in their portfolio. But, it's like you learn a word for the first time, and all of a sudden you hear it everywhere. Well, that's me and Aptable. So it's going to be a special episode for me today to hear more about Aptable and what Aptable does, especially for helping companies with their compliance challenges. So, Chaz, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Chaz, can you start off maybe by just telling us a little bit about yourself? You have sort of an interesting background and path, which should be of particular interest to John, so John, pay attention. But, how'd you get your start in cybersecurity, and how'd you end up with where you are today, founding Aptable?
Yeah, and I like how you usually start these with that question of like where personally on the spectrum of security and compliance, do people fall? I started off in high school.
We'll get to that. You're not escaping.
We'll get there. Hold on.
Okay.
I learned how to build like websites and early web apps in the late 90s, early 2000s in high school, and did that for, beer money in college, and took, to get tuition, signed up for the Army and served for a couple years. But I went to law school, so I ended up serving in the Army as a regulatory lawyer in the Pentagon, working a desk for a couple years and learning about sort of like regulatory law and regulations and that. So like my background comes from building shit and the regulatory and compliance piece. So in 2013, I got out of the Army, really wanted to start a company, and we were looking at my co-founder and I were looking at starting a company in healthcare. Right around that time, the HIPAA regulations had just changed. Jeff, your client is probably one of those companies that before 2013, maybe they wouldn't have been directly regulated by HIPAA or something like that, if that's what they're using the deploy product for. But all that kind of changed, and a bunch of companies, SaaS companies and startups were looking at HIPAA and wondering like, how do we do this? How do we build our product and meet these requirements? So our backgrounds, me and my co-founder, our backgrounds being like, look, like we understand HIPAA, we understand regulations, like we can definitely build stuff to make this easier, and being developers and saying we're going to build developer tools. That's where we come from. That's our background. And then when we got into building the second product, Comply, which is based on our experiences trying to get this developer platform SOC 2, Type 2, audited, ISO certified, high trust, because we had a bunch of customers in healthcare going through all these like third-party audits and independent audits, and just thinking like, man, this is what's the language threshold on the show? This is a nightmare. This sucks. And trying to set out to make that easier.
All right. So are you ready for what we call the hot seat question?
Hot seat question. I'm prepared. I did my homework.
All right. The hot seat question is, where do you fall on what we like to call the continuum of security versus compliance?
I went back and watched a couple episodes, and I went back and watched the first episode, the intro episode, where a bunch of you guys talked about sort of your views on security and compliance. And I don't know where that means for where I fall, but I definitely drink the Kool-Aid of compliance is not security, and anybody who confuses that, again, I want to know the language threshold. I'm usually anybody who confuses that could end up in a lot of trouble. I believe that building a well-designed security program can make compliance so much easier, and that they don't have to be at loggerheads. That said, like, the compliance people need to agree. You gotta find that common ground of like risk. What are we actually trying to worry about? What are we actually trying to do here? Compliance people can be happy with a well-designed compliance program or a security program. The other part, which I think, which I haven't heard or heard seen, but we hear a lot of our customers. So our customers are SaaS vendors who are trying to run compliance programs, and
Right.
For a lot of them, they view the compliance sort of stuff as like ways to unlock revenue. They do it to try to drive business, and I think that this is not on the, I guess, the security and compliance spectrum, but I think there's increasingly, it's easier and easier to show how these things drive growth, unlock new market opportunities for businesses, make the sales process easier. Like a lot of companies do SOC 2 because it makes the sales process easier and faster. How it can help you like expand within a customer account by being able to like do more and more for that customer as they trust you more. So I think that's certainly deeply, I don't know if it's underappreciated, but that's also a bit of the perspective that I bring into it. Because again, like we're a tech company trying to build product, trying to take it to market, and having to figure out all of these compliance issues. But when we did, it was amazing for growth. It made deals so much faster for us to close. It made us able to sell much quicker into larger companies. And so the compliance stuff is like it can be box checking, at its worst. At its best, it can be the measurement, I like the way I forget who put this, whether it was John or somebody. But like the idea that like compliance is an output of a well-architected, well-designed system that's operating effectively. Like it just emits information that you can use and say, okay, great. But if you think of compliance as like the input and then design systems just to meet compliance specs without understanding risk and tying it back to like, what are you actually trying to protect? What are good decisions to make about the level of effort or resources you put on something? If you get that backwards, you end up with, the reason why security traditionally hates compliance. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Interesting.
That's where I'm coming from.
That's actually, what you were talking about, the messaging and how it helps sales and marketing. That's actually something that's I don't think we've really addressed that or touched on that, but I've certainly seen that. Many of my PCI, everybody drink now, I said it, customers over the years that have been, especially the service providers, not the merchants, but all the middlemen, all the third parties. Absolutely, that's been, either they've got this big, huge customer that's screaming at them to be compliant, so they got to seal the deal, keep the customer, or they want to use it to be able to put in their literature, we are, fill in the blank compliance. But you don't see as much of that in language in terms of marketing programs of we're secure, because what does that mean? So from that perspective, I find it fascinating that you bring up compliance from the perspective of people hate it or love it. They at least have some idea what it means, and it implies some sort of level that somebody else said, yeah, you're there.
I like compliance again. Like compliance is the list of crap you probably should be doing. Like it's the known knowns. It's like, you should be doing this stuff. Now, how you implement that can either be a complete waste of time, or it can be like elegant and efficient and based on data and automation and all that. But it's the list of stuff that like you probably should have an answer for, right? A compliance questionnaire doesn't get at the really interesting stuff, which requires like follow-up questions and like
Right.
nuance and an understanding of scope and things like that.
Yeah, and then the other thing that you were saying in terms of if you've got a decent security program, the compliance should just be sort of a natural byproduct. And from a PCI perspective, at least, many of my customers have struggled over the years with being prepared when it came time for the second and the third and the fourth annual assessment, after we went through such pains to get them there the first time. And where they usually fall down is they fail to realize that compliance, which is really measuring and keeping track of all your different security processes and technologies and things you do, is something you do on an ongoing basis throughout the year. And they struggle either with doing it more than the one time and thinking that they're good for a year, or being able to track and maintain and be able to produce evidence that they were doing all the things that they were supposed to be doing, which is my entree for you to talk about Apptable Comply. How can you help companies sort of get over the hump of always playing catch up and actually keep track of their compliance programs on an ongoing, continuous basis?
Yeah, I mean, what you described is exactly it. It's the difference from thinking of a compliance audit as a point in time that you pass and then you're good, versus thinking of compliance as like interpretation of evidence that's emitted from your business as it runs. And your business processes, ideally, security is not, I haven't seen an episode, but I'm sure you guys have opinions on this, where like security is not like it's a standalone thing over here, like, oh, that's security, that's the security team.
No, we totally don't have opinions on that.
Right? Like, you want to bake this stuff in, you want to make, sort of security and compliance and all of that cooked into how you design, how you plan, how you define requirements, and flow it into how you run your business. With the what you're describing, Jeff, which is like the struggle to actually do that and operationalize that. That's actually why we built Comply and started selling it in the first place, was because we went through we were doing, I think, around like $6 million in recurring revenue on this hosting product called Deploy, which we run and sell. It's our first product. And we decided to front load ISO certification, because that would provide everything else would be pretty much easier after that. It provided a good skeleton to start with the compliance program. So we did ISO, SOC 2, and high trust all in like 6 months, basically. And we were trying to figure out, what is the actual, to do something like this, what are the core set of business operations, controls that we should have in place, and then how do we actually make that run? Like, how do we do that? What now I would describe as compliance or security operations. That was not super clear. We used auditors and consultants, and they were not helpful. We got stuff like we had to go through change management and figure, go through the change management domain of ISO and figure out how are we going to articulate and describe, our business in a way that, and if we need to modify it to meet these requirements. And the consultants we were working with, we asked them for, an example, like how would you, with a tech company, implement a change management program, and then also in a way that meets these requirements. And they gave us this policy that was 15 pages long and looked like it was, out of IBM from 1994. And it's the change management board shall convene monthly to approve changes. We were just like, have you guys ever heard of GitHub? This is not how we do change management at all. And there's a big gap basically between what the advice that we were getting and sanity, how to actually run a company that's largely, Apptable is 58 people today, and 100% like distributed. Everybody's
Right.
100% distributed, but we were heavily distributed before that. So we're this company where, the entire company is like people on laptops and cloud services. And we were like, this sucks. Everything
Right.
about this sucks. We're getting to a point where like we're the kind of company where our security, a big chunk of our security, and therefore our ultimate compliance posture, is the configuration and management of like SaaS assets. Like we're in AWS as our primary infrastructure vendor. We use a ton of different SaaS services for everything that we do. We build a ton of stuff, but it's in the cloud, And
So you're
whether our
almost
security,
making. I'm sorry, you're almost making it sound like you were your first customer. You were going through the pain yourself.
we built it. Absolutely. Yeah, we
and you built it for yourself.
comply for ourselves. Yeah. And we started for a year and a half or so, we were basically selling it to small and medium-sized companies, companies that didn't have like ourselves, that were under 100 employees, and we're just trying to get like SOC 2 for the first time. So we made like SOC 2 in a box, ISO in a box,
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
What we found just about a year ago was that I didn't know what GRC was like 3 years ago. I have to admit, I had no idea. And now I know a bit more about that. And it's like, that's a dirty word. It's a 4-letter word. Everyone hates it.
Mm-hmm.
No one likes their GRC system. And at the same time, there's an enormous amount, like Jeff, what you said about, a lot of compliance is basically being able to interpret records, audit records for an organization. And the records are, you have these controls or these business processes. They could be technological processes. They could be configuration states. They could be like administrative processes like training and risk assessment and stuff like that. But you can map them out and say, okay, these are the things that are supposed to be happening. Again, like the list of shit you should probably be doing. And you can test them and say like, okay, what evidence is there that, these things are actually getting done? And a lot of times the evidence is a body of records. That's something like, the risk assessment was done. Here it is. The, the asset inventory was updated. Here's the record of when it was updated. And here's, the record of each time it was signed off on. We did user access control reviews and did those on a regular basis, and then kept like a record, a ticketing system or a spreadsheet for a lot of companies. So yeah, and it's a slog. We're trying to build what we saw ourselves, and what we see with pretty much the entire market is like, this should just be computers talking to computers. We are talking with, our customer base are, we become mid-market companies, but 100 to 2,000, 3,000-ish person companies, and they're hiring integration engineers to build scripts, to reconcile access controls, to make sure that like devices, basic like compliance, like housekeeping stuff, like, yep, we checked locks, we made sure that systems were configured correctly. And so we're building a platform to automate that kind of work and make it massively, massively easier. So yeah, based on the fact that like we were like, this whole thing sucks. This whole area sucks.
I don't know if I can speak for any of my co-hosts, but there's something that I find unusually refreshing about a company that's built a tool, first to make their lives easier. They saw a need and they actually solved the problem. It's like in the old days, we used to say that necessity was the mother of invention, and but for the last 15, 20 years or so, it seems like most, especially technology companies, they come up with the technology and then they go find a use for it. They go find a business application for it or a product application for it. So, it's technology in search of a problem to solve, whereas you guys actually had a problem and you solved it with technology. I personally think that that's fascinating and somehow comforting and reassuring. Gentlemen, my co-hosts, agree, disagree, want to weigh in here?
You
I'll
know,
jump in for a second.
it's in-
Chaz, very
Okay.
interesting
John, go ahead.
your
Go ahead.
background, your legal background, and I'm just kind of curious because security and compliance have so much of a nexus with law. If there's a breach, the first thing that's going to happen is the lawyers are going to go in and say, okay, what was your security? What protocols did you have in place? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how your legal background has helped you bridge the gap between the security world and the legal world, which are obviously very different disciplines, but they're tied together inextricably.
Mm-hmm. The legal background, when we first started building our deploy product, which is like a Docker, like a containerized hosting platform that gives customers these isolated, environments and allows them to deploy apps and databases and stuff like that, and just bang out all these compliance requirements that are cooked into how the platform works. We the reason why we were able to build that, market it, sell it, was because I could look at the regulations for HIPAA, for example. We could look at the implementing, publication, the administrative law that says like here's the regulations, but here's some more of how the regulators are thinking about like why did they pick these regulations? Oh, that's interesting. Like there's an email consent provision, or when can you allow a patient to like text with you, for example? Is that HIPAA compliant? Things like that. The regulators explain this, and then there's additional guidance sort of that they publish. And there's different levels of formality and different levels of specificity. So being able to say, okay, put on the sort of legal hat, look at this, and then put on our developer hat and say, like, what can we build? And how will we go from a architectural decision or an implementation of a feature, and then be able to describe that in a way that both, DevOps and legal can understand and be happy with. That was sort of, I guess how we embarked on Apptable. And then the second big point was what I was describing when we started going through our own audits. And I was like, I didn't know what GRC was in 2016, maybe in 2017, no idea. I had no idea, like we had this idea of like, what is ISO, and kind of like a fuzzy idea of that, but like no idea how to actually like do it, make it happen. Same with SOC 2 and high trust and all these other audits. And the legal background and the ability to sit down and look at like a requirement, like a compliance requirement, and then go find guidance, right? So if you're looking at ISO, PCI is the same way, right? You have guidance, you have interpretations, you have examples, good examples, bad examples that are out there, and you go through and, for whatever compliance thing it is, look at the guidance, look at sort of examples, and then be able to, represent that in software accurately and say, okay, so this is kind of getting into like the weeds of like GRC and stuff, but say you have like a requirement for access reviews. How do you conduct one like business process and be able to say, okay, we should get credit for this everywhere in every compliance and security, even protocol that we're doing or framework that we're doing, even though there might be like 5 or 6 different ones, right? And they're all kind of worded slightly differently. But being able to go and say, okay, this is a thing that we can do and something we can implement. It satisfies these requirements when we do it in this way. That kind of, and that you don't need to be a lawyer to interpret, ISO or SOC 2 or something like that. You might be to interpret like a legal regulatory scheme like HIPAA, GDPR, CCPA. But the background's helpful. Just going from like, here's a textual requirement, here's some facts, and then how do we make them? How do we reconcile them? How do we make them meet in the middle?
Interesting.
Yeah, I would say with your background, I'm sure this is the farthest thing from your mind right now, but at some point in your life, becoming an expert witness would be a natural thing for you.
Get up there and be like, guilty, not guilty. They'd be like, sir, sit down. Not what an expert witness is, sir. Yeah.
You want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
Yeah.
Expert witnesses are people that come in with specialized knowledge and charge you a fortune. So it's a pretty good gig, actually.
Yes, I do. I charge a fortune for that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Josh.
All right. So, we've got some really interesting points about compliance automation and compliance collection, evidence collection, and so on and so forth. And your website is actually very good, although I got to say, I'm sorry, I hate the font you've got on there. For some reason, it just weirds me out that the blocks are missing. So, like, if somebody goes to buy this.
Josh, where?
Yeah?
Continue. Just where? Continue.
If somebody goes to buy this, I was a little confused, I'll admit. I went through your website. How does it implement? I mean, you've got to. Are you literally going to pull in integrations from every system I've got? Is that the only way to do this?
No, I mean, so the Comply product it's a lightweight GRC, and when I say that, I mean like it doesn't do like business units of global conglomerates. Our target customers are like 100 to 1,000, 2,000 person companies.
Okay.
They might have multiple products and stuff, but it implements like a GRC in the sense that there are controls, policies. You have your asset records, your people records, the records of everything that you're trying to protect. And then you can do, workflow stuff like procedures, execution of procedures, templates, things like that. So that's all the basic like record keeping system. That's like your vanilla table stakes. Like every GRC should have all of that stuff. No questions asked. Spreadsheet replacement. Like why should you use software instead of spreadsheets for this kind of stuff? And then on top of that, there's a bunch of integrations that take all of that sort of basic architecture and help you just screen through and automate things. So if you don't have a user access, if you have a system, maybe it's an internal system and you built it and you have some kind of security or compliance related event like a user impersonation flow where somebody wants to get elevated privileges and then they need to give a reason, or maybe that needs to be like signed off on or audited for something like that. So there's no apptable integration for that. It's not like AWS, Okta, we don't.
That's what I'm asking. Exactly.
Yeah. So we have the whole system. It's designed, basically just to be a big data model and to make easy for you to use out of the box. But it's got a really neat backend. So there's a set of APIs that you can post, payloads and post stuff to. There are integrations that out of the box provide a bunch of evidence checks. You can like customize them. You can write code. You can come up with your own checks, stuff like that. You asked about like implementation and onboarding. So part of it is getting the GRC set up, and part of it is going through and integrating with whatever you have that we integrate with. A big part of our strategy is like ultimately like build all the integrations, integrate with the most, and have a really, really robust set of APIs for stuff that we can't integrate with out of the box to make it easy to do. I think GRC is going the way of single sign-on, where it's just going to be a ton of automation, and the companies that do that the best are going to have just massive libraries of pre-built integrations and provide a lot of utility out of the box, and then provide you a good platform to customize and extend it ultimately.
Neat.
Cool. Hey, real quick, Chaz, before we wrap up, there's in our notes on our page, on your page on our website, something about a 2020 compliance report. Can you quickly tell us what somebody might find in that report?
Did they? Let me see.
Did they do that
survey? I know. Marketing team works faster than I do. Where is that on the website?
Securityweekly.com/apptable.
Oh, your website. Got it.
Yeah, our website.
We went out and did a survey of 100 director level like security and compliance directors at 100 to 5,000 person headcount companies. So titles are like Director of Information Security, Director of Security and Compliance, Director of Customer Trust, Director of GRC, all the way up to CISO for some companies, and all in basically SaaS vendors. So like companies that are both building and buying a lot of cloud services. And we surveyed them and asked them basically like all kinds of questions about like how much time do you spend on like audits and evidence collection? How much time do you spend on answering security questionnaires? How much time do you spend on distributing security materials, things like that? And a lot of it is getting at like the scale of kind of manual work and effort that is put into compliance and security, and then sort of how much of that effort is basically like driving sales or sales enablement. And what we found is that these directors of compliance and security, when they break down their time and their effort, they're spending like 40% of their time and resources on enabling sales, having conversations with big customers, generating like material and packages, and making like whatever bigcode.com/security, and making like a nice page to showcase their security and compliance posture, stuff like that. So we got all kinds of data on average amount of time, and we're going to be releasing this report and allowing people who are their peers basically to benchmark like, am I spending way more time, way less time than my peers in other companies? Where do I fall in terms of that stuff? So that's what that is, and that's coming out soon.
Okay, interesting. That sounds like an interesting read. So need to wrap up. So thank you, Chaz, very much for sharing a little bit about yourself, and especially about the Aptable vision, at least the Aptable Comply vision. It's great that you're not even eating your own dog food. You made your own dog food before you ate it. So that's very cool. For our listeners, if you want to learn more about Aptable, as we said, you can go to securityweekly.com/Aptable for more information, and also you can submit to get a copy of this 2020 compliance report. So that's going to wrap us for the first segment. Chaz, again, thank you for joining us, and we'll be right back in a few minutes for our mock trial.